In my last video, I made you a promise. I told you that one of the most commonly eaten breakfast foods in Western countries is silently spiking your visceral fat every single morning, including foods that have been marketed to you for decades as heart-healthy, as the smart choice, as the thing a responsible person eats to start the day right. Today, I'm going to show you exactly what that food is, why it does this at the cellular level, and what to replace it with. I'm Dr. Zhang, and I want to start today the way I always start, with a patient. Her name was Margaret, 58 years old, retired school teacher. She came into my clinic 18 months ago after watching one of my videos and deciding she wanted to actually understand what was happening inside her body. Not just be told what to eat, understand why. Margaret ate what she had been told was a perfect breakfast every single morning for 11 years. Oatmeal, the rolled kind, sometimes instant, with a drizzle of honey and a glass of orange juice. On weekends, she'd swap the juice for a fruit smoothie loaded with banana, mango, and low-fat yogurt. She exercised 3 times a week. She didn't drink alcohol. She hadn't eaten fast food in years. And yet her follow-up DEXA scan showed visceral fat in the concerning range. Her fasting insulin was elevated. Her triglycerides, the blood fat most directly linked to liver fat accumulation, were 187 milligrams per deciliter. The reference range is under 150. Margaret looked at me and said something I've heard from more patients than I can count. "But I eat so healthily." I said, "I know you do, and I'm going to show you exactly where the problem is hiding." Here is what we are going to cover today. First, I'm going to explain the specific metabolic mechanism by which certain breakfast foods drive visceral fat accumulation, and why the problem is not calories, not fat content, and not what most people assume. Second, I'm going to walk you through the 4 most commonly eaten breakfast foods in Western countries that are silently doing this, including 2 that are almost universally considered healthy. Third, I'm going to show you the specific ingredient that is driving the damage in all 4 of them, and why it affects your liver differently than any other food component. And fourth, I'm going to give you the exact breakfast protocol that the clinical research supports, specific foods, specific combinations, specific timing, that reverses the pattern. This is not about eating less. This is about understanding what you are actually eating at a biological level. Let's start with the mechanism, because everything else flows from it. Your liver has a problem, and that problem has a name: fructose. Not sugar in general, not carbohydrates in general. Specifically, fructose, one of the 2 molecules that makes up table sugar, and the primary sugar in fruit juice, honey, agave syrup, and most commercial sweeteners. And the reason fructose is different from every other carbohydrate you eat comes down to one anatomical fact. Fructose can only be metabolized by the liver. Every other carbohydrate you consume, glucose from bread, rice, oatmeal, potatoes, gets distributed to cells throughout the entire body for energy. Every cell in your body can use glucose. Muscle cells, brain cells, heart cells, they all take a share. The liver only has to process a fraction of the glucose you eat. Fructose is different. Fructose bypasses the normal distribution system entirely. It goes straight to the liver via the portal vein, the same route we discussed in our last video when we talked about visceral fat and inflammatory signals. And unlike glucose, which enters cells through a tightly regulated insulin-dependent pathway, fructose enters liver cells through an unregulated transporter called GLUT5. There is no insulin signal. There is no feedback mechanism. No matter how much fructose arrives, the liver takes it all. Here is what happens when the liver receives more fructose than it can oxidize for immediate energy, which, at typical Western dietary intake levels, is almost always. The liver converts the excess fructose into fat. Specifically, it converts it into triglycerides through a process called de novo lipogenesis, new fat creation. These triglycerides are then either exported into the bloodstream, raising your circulating triglyceride levels, or they remain in the liver, contributing directly to hepatic fat accumulation and NAFLD. Margaret's triglycerides of 187 were not from the dietary fat she was eating. Dietary fat raises triglycerides to a degree, but nowhere near as powerfully as fructose. Her elevated triglycerides were, in large part, the product of her morning orange juice and her weekend smoothies. Liquid fructose delivered rapidly to a liver with no defense mechanism against it. A landmark study published in the Journal of Clinical Investigation gave healthy volunteers controlled doses of either fructose or glucose in addition to their regular diet. After 10 weeks, the fructose group showed significantly greater increases in visceral fat volume, measured by MRI, compared to the glucose group. Both groups consumed the same total calories. The fat accumulation was driven specifically by fructose, not by caloric excess. The visceral fat increase in the fructose group was 14% in 10 weeks. From one dietary change. Now let me show you where this fructose is hiding in the 4 most common breakfast foods in Western countries. The first is fruit juice. Orange juice, apple juice, grapefruit juice, all marketed as natural, vitamin-rich, part of a balanced breakfast. An 8-ounce glass of orange juice contains approximately 21 grams of sugar. Of that, roughly 10 to 11 grams is fructose. It arrives in liquid form, which means it is absorbed extremely rapidly. Far faster than the fructose from whole fruit, where fiber slows absorption significantly. Liquid fructose hits the liver like a wave, not a tide. And critically, fruit juice contains none of the fiber, none of the polyphenols, and almost none of the micronutrients that give whole fruit its health value. It is essentially sugar water with vitamins added back. The sugar industry understood this before the health industry admitted it. Studies comparing whole fruit consumption to fruit juice consumption consistently show that fruit juice drinkers have higher rates of metabolic syndrome, higher triglycerides, and higher visceral fat than people eating the equivalent calories from whole fruit. The second is flavored yogurt. Low-fat flavored yogurts, strawberry, peach, blueberry, are one of the most aggressively marketed health foods of the last 30 years. They line the health food sections of every grocery store. The American Heart Association has previously granted heart-healthy certifications to products that contain 20 to 26 grams of sugar per serving. Where does that sugar come from? High fructose corn syrup, added cane sugar, or fruit concentrate, all of which are metabolized as fructose in the same hepatic pathway I just described. A typical 6-ounce container of low-fat flavored yogurt contains between 12 and 26 grams of added sugar. That is the equivalent of 3 to 6 teaspoons of sugar, in a product labeled low-fat and heart-healthy. The low-fat formulation is specifically why the sugar is there. When manufacturers remove fat, food loses palatability. They replace the fat with sugar to maintain taste. This trade-off, less dietary fat, more fructose, has been one of the most consequential errors in nutritional guidance of the last half-century. The third is commercial granola and granola bars. Granola is perceived as a whole food, a natural product, something you might find in a health food store next to the organic lentils. A typical 1-cup serving of commercial granola contains 24 to 30 grams of sugar, from honey, maple syrup, brown sugar, or dried fruit. Honey and maple syrup are approximately 40% fructose by composition. Dried fruit is one of the most concentrated sources of fructose available. A 1/4 cup of raisins contains roughly 12 grams of fructose in a portion that takes seconds to eat. The fiber that would have slowed the absorption of that fructose in the whole grape has been largely destroyed in the drying process. Granola bars are categorically worse. They add high fructose corn syrup, glucose syrup, and additional sweeteners on top of the dried fruit and honey base. They are marketed as energy bars, hiking food, clean eating. They are, metabolically speaking, candy bars in a hiking-appropriate package. The fourth is the one that will surprise the most people watching this video: oatmeal. I want to be precise here because oatmeal is not categorically harmful, and the nuance matters. Plain steel-cut oats, eaten slowly with protein and fat, have a glycemic and metabolic profile that is genuinely reasonable. But this is not how most people eat oatmeal. Most people eat instant oats or rolled oats with one or more of the following: honey, maple syrup, brown sugar, dried fruit, fruit juice, flavored protein powder with added sweeteners, or commercial oat packets that arrive pre-sweetened with 12 to 18 grams of sugar already mixed in. The oat itself is primarily starch, glucose chains that break down into blood glucose relatively quickly, especially in the processed instant form. When combined with the fructose from honey, maple syrup, or dried fruit, as is almost universally done, you are delivering both a rapid glucose spike that drives insulin upward and a simultaneous fructose load that bypasses insulin and floods the liver directly. The combination is specifically problematic because of what elevated insulin does in concert with elevated liver fructose. High insulin suppresses fat oxidation. Your body stops burning stored fat when insulin is high. At the exact same moment, the fructose is being converted to new fat in the liver. Fat creation is being maximized, fat burning is being suppressed, and this is happening at 8 a.m., the first metabolic event of your day. This is what Margaret's breakfast was doing every single morning for 11 years. Now here is the part of the science that I find most underappreciated. The damage from fructose is not proportional to the total amount consumed over a day. It is disproportionately driven by rapid delivery, specifically by liquid fructose and high-concentration fructose sources consumed in the fasted morning state. When you wake up, your liver has been running in a low-insulin, low-substrate fasting state for 7 to 9 hours. It is metabolically primed. The GLUT5 transporters that carry fructose into liver cells are at their highest expression, upregulated by the fasting period. When liquid fructose arrives at this moment, it is absorbed faster, and the de novo lipogenesis response is more pronounced than it would be at any other time of day. A study published in Metabolism examined liver fat accumulation in two groups who consumed the same total daily fructose. One group consuming it in the morning fasted state, the other spreading it evenly across meals. The morning fasted fructose group showed significantly greater hepatic triglyceride accumulation at 8 weeks. Same total fructose. Dramatically different outcome, because when and how fructose is delivered matters as much as how much. This is why breakfast, specifically, is so critical. You have spent 8 hours building a metabolically sensitive liver state, and then many people immediately detonate it with the most concentrated fructose hit of the day in liquid form. Now let me tell you what the evidence supports instead. The breakfast protocol that consistently performs best in clinical research for visceral fat reduction, liver fat reduction, and insulin sensitivity improvement shares 3 characteristics. It is high in protein, it contains healthy fat, and it contains 0 or near 0 fructose. The specific foods that meet all 3 criteria and have been studied in the context of metabolic health after 50 are whole eggs, plain full-fat Greek yogurt, smoked salmon, avocado, and plain nuts. Let me walk through the mechanism for each. Whole eggs are the most evidence-supported breakfast food for metabolic health in the research literature. A randomized controlled trial published in the International Journal of Obesity compared a breakfast of 2 whole eggs to a bagel breakfast, matched for calories, in overweight adults. After 8 weeks, the egg group showed significantly greater reductions in waist circumference, visceral fat, and fasting insulin than the bagel group. The mechanism. The protein and fat in eggs produce a prolonged satiety signal via CCK and peptide YY, gut hormones that suppress appetite and slow gastric emptying. Insulin response to the egg breakfast was dramatically lower than to the bagel breakfast, which means fat oxidation continues through the morning rather than being suppressed. Eggs also contain choline, a critical nutrient for hepatic fat export. Choline is the rate-limiting substrate for the production of VLDL particles, which are the liver's mechanism for exporting fat into the bloodstream. When choline is deficient, as it is in many people eating low-fat, plant-heavy diets, the liver cannot export fat efficiently, and it accumulates. 2 eggs provide approximately 300 milligrams of choline, about 55% of the adequate intake for adults. Plain full-fat Greek yogurt, not flavored, not low-fat, provides 15 to 20 grams of protein per serving with minimal sugar. The live bacterial cultures in genuine Greek yogurt, specifically Lactobacillus bulgaricus and Streptococcus thermophilus, have been shown in clinical trials to reduce circulating lipopolysaccharide levels, improve gut barrier function, and shift the microbiome toward reduced inflammation. Recall from our last video that LPS-driven hepatic inflammation is one of the primary drivers of NAFLD progression. Full-fat dairy does not raise visceral fat. Multiple large prospective studies, including a 2016 analysis from the European Journal of Nutrition following over 16,000 adults, found that full-fat dairy consumption was associated with lower body weight and lower visceral fat compared to low-fat dairy after controlling for total caloric intake. The fat in full-fat yogurt is not driving fat accumulation. The sugar in low-fat flavored yogurt is. Smoked salmon or any fatty fish in the morning delivers EPA and DHA, as I detailed in the last video. But the morning timing adds a specific benefit. Omega-3 fatty acids directly activate PPAR-alpha, the nuclear receptor that upregulates hepatic fat oxidation. Consuming omega-3s in the morning fasted state, when the liver is primed for fat metabolism, amplifies this activation. A study in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that omega-3 consumption in the morning produced greater reductions in hepatic fat content than equivalent evening consumption over 12 weeks. Avocado provides monounsaturated fat and fiber with essentially no fructose. The oleic acid in avocado activates the same PPAR alpha pathway as olive oil, the pathway we discussed in the last video. The fiber in avocado slows gastric emptying, blunts any subsequent glucose response from other foods in the meal, and feeds Akkermansia muciniphila, one of the key anti-inflammatory gut bacteria consistently depleted in people with high visceral fat. A randomized controlled trial in the Journal of Nutrition found that adults who ate one avocado daily for 12 weeks had significantly lower visceral fat than the control group. Plain nuts, particularly walnuts, macadamia nuts, and almonds, provide protein, fat, and fiber with minimal carbohydrate. They produce a low insulin response, activate satiety hormones, and provide magnesium and zinc, two minerals consistently deficient in people with insulin resistance and elevated visceral fat. A meta-analysis of 61 controlled trials published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that tree nut consumption significantly reduced fasting insulin levels across all studies. Lower fasting insulin means greater fat oxidation throughout the day. Now let me give you the specific protocol. Remove from your morning all fruit juice, all flavored yogurts, all commercial granola and granola bars, and all oatmeal prepared with sweeteners. If you eat oatmeal plain steel-cut oats with no added sugar, no honey, no dried fruit, and you combine it with a protein source like eggs, it becomes metabolically reasonable. But the sweetened oatmeal version consumed by most people is not reasonable. Not for anyone with elevated visceral fat or liver enzymes. Replace with any combination of 2 or more of the following: 2 whole eggs cooked in extra virgin olive oil, plain full-fat Greek yogurt with a small portion of fresh berries and crushed walnuts, half an avocado, a portion of smoked salmon, or a handful of plain mixed nuts. The combination principle matters. You want protein present at every breakfast, minimum 20 grams. Protein is the most powerful activator of satiety hormones and the most powerful suppressor of the post-meal insulin spike relative to caloric content. Fat slows absorption and extends satiety. And zero fructose means the liver spends the morning in fat-clearing mode rather than fat-creating mode. Timing. Eat within 2 hours of waking. Do not skip breakfast entirely if you have elevated visceral fat or liver enzymes. In people with confirmed hepatic fat accumulation, complete breakfast skipping has been associated with greater NAFLD severity in observational studies, likely because the extended fast upregulates the very GLUT5 transporters that make the next fructose hit more damaging. The goal is not to fast through the morning. The goal is to eat the right things at the right time. Margaret came back 3 months after we had this conversation. She had removed the orange juice and replaced it with water with a squeeze of lemon. She had stopped the sweetened oatmeal and replaced it with 2 eggs cooked in olive oil and plain Greek yogurt. She had stopped the weekend smoothies and replaced them with half an avocado and smoked salmon. Her triglycerides dropped from 187 to 124, within the normal range. Her fasting insulin decreased by 34%. Her liver enzymes normalized. And her follow-up DEXA showed a measurable reduction in visceral adipose tissue in 3 months. From changing 1 meal per day. She didn't change her lunch. She didn't change her dinner. She didn't change her exercise. She changed breakfast. Margaret said something to me at that follow-up that I've been thinking about ever since. She said, "I spent 11 years thinking I was doing everything right. The hardest part of this wasn't changing what I ate. It was accepting that what I'd been told was healthy was making me sick. That's why I make these videos." The food industry spends billions of dollars annually on the marketing of products as heart-healthy, low-fat, natural, and wholesome. The science of how those products interact with your specific metabolic machinery, especially after 50, when your liver's fructose clearing capacity has diminished alongside your mitochondrial function, is buried in journals that most people never access. I access them so you don't have to, and I translate them into something you can actually use, starting tomorrow morning. If this video changed the way you think about your breakfast, and I believe it did, please share it with someone you know who starts every morning with orange juice and oatmeal, thinking they're doing the right thing. They deserve to know this. Subscribe if you haven't already. Next week, I'm going to cover something that has been sitting in the cardiovascular research literature for years and is only now beginning to reach the public conversation. Why the standard advice to reduce dietary fat and increase whole grains, the advice that has defined mainstream nutrition guidance for 40 years, may have been the single greatest contributor to the epidemic of metabolic disease we are now living through. The data is extraordinary. I'll see you then. I'm Dr. Zhang. Take care of yourself, because understanding is the beginning of everything.